The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan voter education organization encouraging informed, active participation in government. We believe that voting is a fundamental right that must be guaranteed. While the League does not support candidates or parties, we do take positions on issues that we have studied. Our programs don't necessarily represent these positions, but do provide forums to increase understanding of public policy issues. We do have an important policy announcement. Some of you are already aware, but the League of Women Voters of Washtenaw County reminds you that we and the League of Women Voters of Michigan oppose the Secure MI Vote petition drive. The Secure MI Vote ballot initiative affects everyone's voting rights. Here are only a few of the reasons why. It eliminates the affidavit option if you don't meet ID requirements at the polls. It mandates people disclose partial Social Security numbers when registering to vote and requires driver's license or state ID number or the last 4 digits of a Social Security number on absentee ballots. And both of these create an identity theft risk. It prohibits election officials from sending or providing absentee ballot applications unless asked. It bans funds from nonprofits to help local officials administer elections. And most importantly, if adopted, it will be referendum proof. Michigan voters will not be able to repeal it. Find out more. We will put a URL in the chat for reading the press release about our stand. And if you would share that link widely and inform your friends and neighbors, and make sure to tell them not to sign the petition. Equally important, we would like you to remind you to tell your senators to support the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. It's required to save our democracy. A link to more information will also be put in the chat. Teresa, okay, over to you.
All right, great. Thank you, Shelley. Hi, everybody. I'm Teresa Reed. I'm Vice Chair of the Program Committee for the League of Women Voters of Washtenaw County. Tonight, we're happy to present our third of 3 quarterly programs exploring Washtenaw County's response to the climate crisis. Our Lunch and Learn programs, which are typically held on the 4th Friday of the month, but it was earlier this month, are also dedicated to the environment and climate crisis this quarter. Just 3 months ago in August, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, issued its 6th report. For the first time since its founding in 1988, the IPCC speaks with certainty about the total responsibility of human activity for rising temperatures and warns that the planet will warm by 1.5 degrees Celsius in the next 2 decades without drastic moves to eliminate greenhouse gas pollution. As we know from painful experience, climate change brings catastrophic heat, cold, floods, drought, storms, and fire worldwide. We can expect more crop failures, species extinction, heat-borne diseases, civil and international conflict over disappearing resources, and overwhelming flows of millions of climate refugees. It's no wonder that Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, called the IPCC's latest report a code red for humanity. Guterres continued, "This report must sound a death knell for coal and fossil fuels before they destroy our planet." Our topic tonight is zero waste and the future of recycling with Mike Garfield, Director of the Ecology Center. After the first Earth Day in 1970, Americans started recycling in a move to reduce our waste. What started as a trickle of dedicated Americans dropping off newspapers and flattened cans with the labels removed to recycling centers, I imagine a lot of you remember that, I do, grew into large, convenient, municipally funded, often single-stream, curbside recycling. By 2000, Americans were putting millions of tons of consumer waste into recycle bins annually and feeling very good about it. But in the last decade or so, there's been a lot of press about the collapse of recycling. We have learned that few of the plastic containers we put into our bins are recycled. And we've been confused by complicated labeling of recyclables that changes from community to community. Worst, despite the ubiquity of our chant, reduce, reuse, recycle, for decades, consumption has continued to rise. In 1970, the average American generated 2.68 pounds of garbage per day. By 2017, that number had grown to 4.51 pounds, a 60% increase. Add to these problems the fact that powerful corporations who spend billions of dollars a year greenwashing their brands profit from the failure of recycling. And we have a daunting challenge. We need to reduce the inflow of waste into the system and invest in strategies at scale for reusing the waste we do produce. We need to create a circular economy. To help explain this, we're joined tonight by Mike Garfield, who's director of the Ecology Center, which was founded in Ann Arbor just after the first Earth Day in 1970. Mr. Garfield has worked for health, environment, and justice in Michigan for over 30 years, serving as director of the Ecology Center since 1993. Mr. Garfield has been one of Michigan's leading voices on environmental issues and an architect of some of the state's most ambitious municipal initiatives in land use, transit, and solid waste. I'm almost done. Mike has a long bio. He's done so much. Under his leadership, the Ecology Center has grown from a primarily local organization focused on Washtenaw County to a regional innovation center with a national reputation. Over the past 2 decades, the Ecology Center spearheaded a statewide campaign that closed all of Michigan's medical waste incinerators, established the Midwest's largest locally funded land preservation program, created the country's premier consumer product toxic testing service, and won the nation's top community recycler award. The Ecology Center has offices and facilities in Ann Arbor and Detroit, and is the parent organization of Recycle Ann Arbor. Mike is also one of the 4 founders of the Alliance of Mission-Based Recyclers, with the nice acronym AMBER. Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Teresa. That was so nice. Thank you. Thank you for having me spend the evening with you. Hello, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be meeting with you here. And I tell you, over the years, I've had so many wonderful opportunities to work with the League at the local level and at the state level, and it's been a while. So it's great to be here with you tonight. I have a presentation that I'd like to share, and let's see if it worked. It worked a couple of minutes before we came on. There we are. So Teresa gave you the gave you my official bio. Let me let me share with you, if my device is going to work, the unofficial biography. So you know a little bit more about me. I was born in New York City to a couple of liberal Jewish social workers. My mom believed that the outdoors was the place between the apartment's front door and the bus. But that whole idea about the outdoors didn't really stick with me. Both of my parents believed in the Jewish principle of healing the world. They were active in the civil rights and social movements of the 1950s, 60s, and later. On the top left there, that's a photo of me getting wheeled by my mom at a protest in New York. And the whole healing the world idea has had more staying power for me. We moved to the Midwest when I was 10, and I've lived in Michigan since 1980. Since 87, I've lived in the Ann Arbor neighborhood that used to be called North Central, but that many people now call Water Hill. As Teresa mentioned, I've worked most of my career in the environmental movement, much of that time at the Ecology Center. It's given me the platform and the opportunity to work on solutions for some of the most pressing problems facing the world today and facing this community. Maybe the first major campaign that I worked on culminated in a triumphant ballot proposal many, many years ago to fund what was then one of the country's most ambitious recycling and composting programs. That's the trash that's mentioned with abortion and pot in the old Ann Arbor News headline. And some of you may recall that that was actually controversial back then, though we won the campaign in a landslide. Maybe some of you also remember that the leaders of that campaign were the Ecology Center, the Sierra Club, and the League of Women Voters. And I have the fondest memories of working with Susan Greenberg back then. At a personal level, I absolutely love jazz music and basketball. And if I had been taller and more talented, I might have been Wayman Tisdale in the bottom left-hand corner, though I don't know if his name is, or his old photo there is showing up on the screen. Alas, I'm okay with how things have come out, mostly because of the people in the bottom right-hand photo. Along with me there, that's my wife, Catherine, Marquardt, our son, Noah, and that's Juniper there hunting for varmints. Teresa talked about the Ecology Center, so I'll go through this real quickly. Some of our accomplishments over the years. I think as she mentioned, we're probably best known in Washtenaw County for our work on recycling, land preservation, transit. Outside of this area in Southeast Michigan, we're probably best known for our work on toxics policy, the healthy stuff product testing that I mentioned, and or that she mentioned, and other policy work that we do on climate, zero waste, toxics issues. All right. Today, let's jump into the topic here. I want to start with a disclaimer. I am not going to talk primarily about how you can recycle better. I'm sure some of you have a lot of questions about whether this can be recycled and how do you deal with that. And I'll try to answer those questions as best as I can. But what I'm mostly going to focus on, mostly going to focus on is what's needed to solve one of the world's worst environmental and public health problems. So one of the world's worst environmental and public health problems, and what is that problem? Problem of stuff. This is maybe the kind of slide you get when you invite a Jewish environmentalist to a meeting around Christmas time. But I got to say, I'm not here to shame any of you about overindulging in the marvels of the gift-giving marketplace, to renounce the material world, or to actualize your best self by remembering what's really important. I mean, we can go there if you'd like, but I'm coming at this from a different perspective. Our modern economic system has been brilliantly designed for innovation, convenience, function, and cost. But it is not designed for public health and economic justice. A US EPA study found that approximately 42% of all greenhouse gas emissions in the United States are produced by material and food production, use, and disposal. A study a couple of years ago by an international coalition of large global cities focused on climate action found that the consumption-based emissions, climate emissions of cities in the United States and Europe, are significantly greater than their sector-based emissions. Why that's important is because when you hear about where carbon emissions and the other emissions that cause climate change come from, people often talk about them in terms of sectors. The transportation sector, our cars and trucks and airplanes and what, the building sector, and other sectors. But if you look at the economic system, it's the making of things that in the sector-based approach gets categorized, gets broken up into different places. But making all the stuff of the modern world and the food of the modern world is extremely carbon intensive. Our stuff is also loaded with toxic chemicals. Every infant in the world today is born with over 200 toxic chemicals in their bloodstream. Those substances are ubiquitous in the environment because over 80,000 chemicals used in commerce today have not been tested for their health or environmental impacts. And US law restricts only a very few. Those chemicals are primarily used in the extraction of minerals and materials, the production of energy, the manufacture of goods, and the goods themselves, which is how most of them actually reach us. In this photo, we're looking at the grease-resistant coating on McDonald's paper wrappers. They're made from PFAS chemicals, which you're probably aware are the cause of widespread pollution and contamination all over the world. It's very well documented in Michigan. To make matters that much worse, the chemicals production process is a terrible climate problem. Single-use plastic is a small portion of the waste stream, but it's a huge part of the waste problem. It's a problem in the oceans, in the Great Lakes, in communities throughout Asia. You've probably seen the pictures of seabirds strangled by plastic. Plankton are now outnumbered 6-to-1 by plastic in the oceans. There are over 1 million seabirds that die every year because of plastic pollution. Plastics have even been found in the Mariana Trench. And the problem with stuff is a question of justice too. As currently structured, the material economy disproportionately burdens people of color. A study in 2019 found that Black and Hispanic Americans shoulder a pollution burden of 56% and 63% more exposure, respectively, than they contribute to. Every product we use was made from a natural resource from the earth, material that had to be, a resource that had to be extracted, refined, and transported, where every step in the process places additional burdens on communities of color. And every product we discard adds further burdens to communities near landfills and incinerators. The protesters on the left are from St. James Parish in the part of Louisiana between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. They live with the highest concentration of chemical plants in North America and have a 50 times greater likelihood of dying from cancer than the average American. Closer to home, the work of collecting trash, not to mention recyclables and compostables, is one of the most dangerous occupations in the United States, and it's predominantly done by people of color. This goes back a long time. You may recall that Martin Luther King went to Memphis to help lead a strike of sanitation workers there. So we're not going to solve these problems all by ourselves. Our individual behavior is important, but it's not the full solution to the problem. Industry public relations wizards have co-opted the message of the early environmentalists from one that called for a systemic change in the market economy to one where if you and me and everyone just recycled better, and we made more responsible consumer decisions, then everything will be fine. Well, ordinary people did not design the mess that we're in, and ordinary people shouldn't have to research all 80,000 chemicals and packaging types and figure out how to do the right thing. we've got jobs and families and lives to live. This is a systemic problem that needs public policy fixes. The way to solve it is through what we call zero waste in the circular economy. So what does that mean? Here is a super simplified illustration. On the left is the predominant model of industrialization, which has provided us with most of the wonders of modern civilization. Of course, this very simple diagram, natural resources take, make, dispose, waste, that should have other arrows going off from it too. There are externalities, pollution, carbon emissions, waste, labor exploitation at every stage of the process. During the pandemic, we've heard a lot about global supply chains and how complicated and vulnerable they can be. Historically, the perspective of policymakers has been to create laws and regulations that protect communities, workers, consumers, and the environment at each separate stage of the linear economy, including the stages in between the 4 stages on the screen. The biggest problem with that approach is that it's really hard to clean up a problem once it's been created. Here in Washtenaw County, the Gilman Sciences groundwater contamination is undoubtedly the most notable example. It's much easier, at least in concept, to design products and processes for people and the planet. And that's the notion behind the circular economy. Now here's a more sophisticated illustration. There are brilliant engineers and designers at work creating stuff that mimics the processes of the natural world. You're probably familiar with plant-based packaging, but plants and natural materials are being used to make building materials, clothing, other items, even cars. Some of these are designed to be reused, recycled, or composted when they reach their end of life. But here's the thing, for every noble, ambitious, and innovative product out there, there are at least 10 products made out of snake oil and public relations. It's really, really hard to tell them apart. At a less ambitious level, there are all sorts of confusing products that I'm sure a lot of you are trying to figure out, can I recycle these things or not? I actually have some props with me. I'm wondering if I should stop sharing, or maybe you can see me in the little box, depending on how big I am, but on your screen. But for example, can you see this toothpaste tube here? Let's see here. All right, this is a Tom's toothpaste tube. It's made out of polypropylene. The container is made out of polypropylene, number 5 plastic, which is generally a less noxious plastic as these things go. It's generally recyclable. Polypropylene, when it comes in the form of yogurt containers and other big tubs, is pretty recyclable. But when it comes in the form of a toothpaste tube, it's utterly unrecyclable, even though Tom's puts recyclable with the chasing arrows and the number 5 symbol on their product. Similarly, there are plastic bags that again are recyclable in theory. They're number 4 plastic, low density polyethylene. But again, in a curbside collection program where materials get sorted at a material recovery facility, they're actually a real problem for the MRF and gum up the machines that are trying to sort the materials. And there are a whole bunch of other materials that are technically recyclable, are not regulated as unrecyclable, maybe labeled that way, and they make such great confusion in our system. And it's one of the things that has to get resolved at a systems level. So what are those kind of solutions? Well, I guess, backing up just a second, I think, what I would say about the toothpaste tube and the plastic bag and other things that you have big questions about, I would suggest that you default to not recycling them unless you're pretty darn certain they're recyclable in your curbside bin or at the drop-off station at Platt and Ellsworth Road or on Jackson Road. You know, the ambitious, really good materials that a lot of great engineers and designers are trying to make, they're only going to become standard issue when the market demands it or when policy and law requires it. And the problem with the market approach just on its own is that there's really no easy way to know what's good and what's not. And the problem with the policy approach is, you know, politics. but I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those solutions. So at the federal level, what we would like to see in terms of a framework, a strong progressive framework to address the problem of stuff is what's referred to as extended producer responsibility, or EPR. EPR is the idea that manufacturers are responsible for what happens to stuff after consumers are done with it. They'd ideally be able to reuse, recycle, or compost those things, and the manufacturers would bear the cost of doing so. There have been EPR laws recently adopted in Oregon and Maine. Canada has had an EPR system on the books for a number of years. Bottle bills, like we have in Michigan, are an example of EPR policies. But of course, in Michigan, that's just, in most places, it's just for beverage containers. The Break Free from Plastic Act combines, at the bottom there, combines a lot of the things on my list here and others into a comprehensive package. It's sort of like the Green New Deal for stuff. It has about as much likelihood of getting enacted anytime soon as the Green New Deal does. Realistically, we are expecting in the current session, we're expecting some funding for recycling infrastructure from the Build Back Better bill if that gets enacted, and not much else of significance in the short term. But working on these issues is the organization that that Teresa mentioned, Recycling Arbor, the Ecology Center, and some of the other longtime nonprofit recyclers started this organization earlier this year. And we're advancing federal policies like the ones I mentioned, state policies, and becoming a voice within the recycling industry for mission-based recycling. At the state level, Michigan has the really the best bottle bill in the country, but we also have so much more landfill capacity than we need that it makes all alternatives to disposal relatively expensive, which means, bottom line, we're living in, when it comes to stuff, we're living in the best of states and the worst of states, at least insofar as it goes. I mean, that might apply to other issues as well, I suppose. When it comes to stuff, we're probably more worse than best. There is right now a bipartisan package of bills pending in both chambers that would make some fine updates to the state's modest updates to the state's Solid Waste Act. Michigan may also allocate some additional funds for recycling markets and community-based programs, and those are good steps forward too. We can talk more about that later. And close to home, where the politics are a little bit friendlier to this cause, the priorities I would recommend are that we promote our investing in zero waste infrastructure, like the Ann Arbor MRF that was just rebuilt. Building out what's offered for recycling and composting in apartment buildings and for commercial businesses. C&D is construction and demolition materials. So that's improving recovery, expanding recovery for building materials, and also that we invest in education. So in the last 5 years, recycling's been in the news more often, I think more often than it's been in the last 25. And I'm afraid a lot of it is just nonsense. You've probably seen some of these news reports. The national reports reflect the steep decline in prices for recyclable materials that took place between 6 and 2 or 3 years ago. And that decline was due largely to the Chinese government implementing a policy that demanded far higher quality materials than they were getting from North American recyclers, US recyclers, and that led to a glut of materials on the US market. But as recycling was having financial problems, it led to attacks of all sorts. The usual ones that we've heard for decades from the right, but even some from the left, which has been perceiving it as a bailout for the plastics industry. And so I would like to debunk some of the myths about recycling. First of all, recycling was never meant to be the solution to all the problems about stuff. It's part of the solution, but it was never meant to solve all of our environmental problems. There really isn't a problem. In my mind, there's no problem with recycling. The problem is with trash, particularly with plastic trash. But the problems with trash. Recycling is far stronger and more resilient industry than the media seems to understand. 3 years ago, there were $117 billion of economic value generated by the scrap recycling industry in the United States, employing 534,000 people, generating over $12 billion in tax revenues. Problem isn't with recycling. It's a problem that the United States, for the most part, has been treating recycling like it is trash. Like I said, the source of the Chinese recycling regulations was the high level of contamination, mostly plastics, that was sent to them by large-scale American recyclers. For years now, the packaging industry has been creating harder to sort plastic packaging that household recyclers would throw in the bin, but sorting facilities can't separate. It sent shockwaves through the US recycling industry, and it also created the plastic pollution problem that we were talking about before. The vast majority of recycling programs in the United States are carried out by companies whose main business is landfills and solid waste collection. Most of those programs are provided by publicly traded solid waste companies. They make the vast majority of their profits from their landfill, incinerator, and trash collection contracts. They don't do community education, curbside tagging, other steps we kind of take for granted in Washtenaw County to promote clean materials. They might compact materials before sorting them or engage in other cost-cutting practices at the expense of material quality. The unscrupulous ones, there aren't many, but there are some. The unscrupulous ones dump recyclables in trash trucks, landfills, and incinerators when recycling prices go bad. Their trade associations lobby aggressively against pro-recycling and waste reduction legislation, and their PR divisions circulate myths about recycling. But a small number of communities, mission-based recyclers, and enlightened local governments have educated their communities to produce high-quality materials. They've passed laws and regulations that provide transparency and high-quality recycling, high-quality recovery. And in those communities, the true value of recycling gets realized and the myths get debunked. When Ann Arbor's MRF was shut down in 5 years ago now, it sent shockwaves through the recycling industry in all of Southeast Michigan, and its absence made it much harder and more expensive for communities throughout the region to do basic recycling. Over the last year, Recycle Ann Arbor has rebuilt the Ann Arbor MRF with $7 million of our own capital, and the facility is now up and running again, really just as of a couple of weeks ago. Despite what you may have heard, there are plenty of markets for recyclable materials. They demand clean materials. There are new major end markets under construction all across the United States. The closest big one is a new scrap paper mill in Ohio that produces Amazon boxes. That's where most of the scrap paper and cardboard in most of southern Michigan is going to now. Other niche processors have emerged, like a glass beneficiation facility in Dayton, which is where Recycling Arbor sends its glass to get cleaned and sorted after going through its MRF, and then it gets sent to a bottle manufacturer for reprocessing. For the most part, though, end markets need very clear materials, clean materials, and MRFs just can't sort everything. The key to thinking about recyclable quality is you have to remember we're making new stuff out of it. It's the feedstock for new materials, and in any community municipal recycling program, there's going to be stuff that's included in the materials that just it isn't sortable by the machines. It isn't recyclable on the other end after it gets processed. In any recycling program, there's a lot of residue that gets generated. Around the country, in a typical recycling program, maybe as much as 30 to 40% of what's in the curb carts and that goes to a MRF sorting facility, it ends up being thrown away as trash. In Ann Arbor, we're now keeping that number below 12%, and actually a little bit lower. In the past, we've even been better than that. Recycling can also be very economical, very affordable when it's managed well and fully utilized. Michigan communities that own or contract for their own processing managed to survive the market crash from the last few years. A great example of that is up in Petoskey, where the picture on the left and the right were taken. That's the sorting facility up in Emmett County, which is actually the hub of a terrific, more rural recycling program, a real model for recycling programs in Michigan and around the Midwest. That facility is owned and operated by the county, and they run an affordable and excellent program. A good MRF's the hub of any good recycling program. And yes, the stuff eventually does get recycled. What's happening to the materials in Washtenaw County right now? The statistics on this slide are a little bit old, but now that Recycling Arbor has rebuilt the MRF, they will be selling the materials to processors who convert that material into their highest and best use. Or at least that's the goal. In some MRFs, material gets downcycled, where, say, glass is turned into landfill cover or plastic gets made into clothing. That may be better than burning it in incinerators or dumping them in landfills, but it doesn't help reduce the use of raw materials and petrochemicals when new glass and plastic bottles get made. So Recycling Arbor is sending their glass, like I said, to that facility in Dayton, where it gets cleaned of all impurities and color sorted. Other material is getting sold sold to markets that are all relatively close within a 5-hour radius of this community. And as much as possible, we're trying to get materials reprocessed into what they started as much as that is possible. Recycling is also a labor-intensive, job-producing industry. And like I was talking about before, it's one of the zero waste generally is one of the most basic solutions to the climate crisis. Roughly speaking, if Washtenaw County could reduce its waste in half through waste reduction, reuse, composting, and recycling. It would produce the climate equivalent of removing nearly 50,000 cars from the road or outfitting nearly 20,000 houses with solar panels. And that's why Ann Arbor's carbon neutrality plan, the A20 plan, has a full section on the circular economy. It's one of the key priorities of the plan. So I'll wrap up with a couple more slides. I want to focus on what each of us individually and through our organizations can do. And I think three of the most important things in this space are the three I have listed here. In my opinion, there's nothing more important than civic action. No matter how dysfunctional our politics might be, the idea of people banding together in organizations, through campaigns and movements to make a difference is the only thing that's really going to move our country and the world to a healthier place. It's critically important in the waste and recycling space, which, you know, for years, I think we all thought that problem was fixed. We had recycling programs, so what else let's move on to other issues. Civic action is critical. Organized market action that brings consumers together to pressure manufacturers to make cleaner stuff, more recyclable stuff, to use recycled content in their materials, to promote zero waste in all their practices. That kind of consumer demand at scale makes a big difference. And, you know, to get to scale, I think it takes, you know, it takes that decision by each and every person, each and every family and community to promote a zero waste culture and mindset, to, much as you can, try to find alternatives to those single-use plastics. Do your best to cut down on the materials you use and support policies that make that easier for everybody. So if you like what I've been talking about, I can only recommend the following things. First, I would encourage you to give the gift of charity this holiday season. And that's the website, not ecologicenter.org. This is ecocenter.org, although that's a fine group too, if you have any California connections. The Washington Zero Waste Coalition is a small but active coalition. Doesn't have a web presence yet, but it's developing it. And if you're interested in becoming part of a group of activists that are promoting zero waste in the community, just feel free to send me to email me about it. Do sign up if you're not already for Ecology Center alerts and news. And if you're interested in national news on these issues, I recommend Break Free from Plastic, the Alliance for Mission-Based Recyclers, and a mostly focused on toxic, but very much on consumer products and stuff. There is a fantastic organization that works on market demand and organizing consumer demand puts pressure on retailers and manufacturers, called Mind the Store. And with that, I'd be happy to take my screen down and field any questions, discussion, arguments, what have you.
We have so many questions. I'm not sure how to organize all these questions. We really have a bunch. So let's see. Hang on. I'm gonna drop down to here. To my Google Doc. The organizations. I'm going to jump in. What are the organizations mobilizing consumer demand at scale? Would that be Mind the Store?
I recommend Mind the Store because they do terrific work that's extremely targeted. It tries to define the most strategic campaigns of the time and to focus on manufacturers who might make a difference. And the strategy behind it The strategy behind it depends on the situation. I'll give you one example that's very current. We're an active participant in it, and like I said, their focus has largely been on toxic chemicals and moving them out of the consumer economy, market economy. A great focus right now is on PFAS chemicals, which we hear about, and we hear about the pollution in the Huron River, say, or up in Oscoda at the Air Force Base, and think of it as a industrial scale pollution problem that's left communities with these awful contamination problems, and it is that. But PFAS is in so many products, and our point of view on it is that it needs to be all non-essential uses need to be stopped as soon as possible. And one of the very common uses of it is in waterproofing and water resistance. It's used in a lot of clothes. And Mind the Store recently organized a campaign. It's still in progress, but it was focused on Thanksgiving time. It's focused on REI, the outdoors store company, on the logic that the company's mission is very aligned with the environment, and has been in dialogue with activists for many years about a number of environmental practices there. And what Mind the Store is trying to do is to get REI to pressure their suppliers, the people that make the people that make their jackets and shirts and everything, and move it up the chain like that. And once one big retailer might do that, it puts pressure on others. And so that's why I recommend them. There are plenty of other groups as well, but I think they do terrific work.
Okay, so start with Mind the Store and then move out from there in terms of organized consumer pressure.
That's my suggestion.
Okay.
Got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. So I'm assuming we also, I'm going to stay at this kind of a big picture for a minute here and maybe move in. So also thinking about then legislative advocacy, we should write to our US senators and representatives saying, are there specific bills right now that we want to advocate for, or would it be better to say, this is a top priority for me, and remind them of that on a regular basis?
At this point, I think it's great to communicate with your representative, your elected officials about the issue generally. There's no proposal at the federal level right now that's being actively considered. Senator Merkley of Oregon introduced the bill that I mentioned, the Break Free from Plastic Act.
Right.
It has no Michigan co-sponsors yet. Like I said, it takes it takes most of the activists' longstanding wish list and puts it together. It's a tremendous framework for a rational way for us to regulate stuff in the country. The campaign for that act is being coordinated by an international coalition called Break Free from Plastic, who I mentioned. Okay. They have organized some extraordinary campaigns of their own, and could provide a lot of information about that bill and related proposals. There are other proposals that are pending in Congress right now. I think if Congresswoman Dingell or whoever your representative might be would hear from you that this is an issue you care about, it puts it on their radar screen, because it frankly hasn't been there for a while.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we could write to our federal representatives monthly to say, by the way, this really matters to me. This still matters to me, with a note about why, or some current piece. It feels to me like we could also write to our senators and say, hey, Senator Merkley's proposed bill, say the name again. The Break Free from Plastics.
It's the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act.
Okay, plastic pollution. So just say, hey, we really love this bill and would love to see you as a co-sponsor.
We had honestly, we haven't worked on Gary Peters or Debbie Stabenow yet to do that. So we haven't put any organized pressure on them yet to co-sponsor. But I imagine that in 2022 there'll be more activity on it, and we'll start doing outreach of that sort. And I wouldn't discourage you in the least.
Yeah, right. We could be the tip of the spear. This room right here. Okay, great. And then, and how are we doing at the state level? I mean, how are our state legislators doing? We know there's, we know it's somewhat fraught, but what would you say about our state legislators in this space?
Well, the state legislature as a whole has not been friendly to these issues for decades at this point. It's been a difficult space to work in, and where Michigan was once a leader on solid waste issues and material issues, really one of the countries we had way back when some of the country's strongest laws around materials and recycling, solid waste, and the environment generally. But that's been whittled away over many years, and I can't make that claim anymore. That said, there are some proposals that are probably long shots for passage right now, but the politics around them are changing a little bit, and I could imagine hearings about them in 2022, or if one of the chambers, if the political leadership in one of the chambers or both changes after the elections next year, then perhaps there's more opportunity. But the one area of policy that I think has an unlikely but possible chance of moving forward is an expansion of Michigan's bottle bill. We cover carbonated beverages under our bill, beer and pop. When the ballot proposal, when the ballot proposal was approved in the 1970s, bottled water didn't exist. I mean, the whole idea of there were juice bottles at that point, but those were handled pretty easily through old-fashioned, through the early recycling programs. Anyway, with the huge growth in healthier drinks and non-carbonated drinks, there's recognition throughout the bottling industry, the packaging industry, that bottle bills need to adapt to the times, and some of the industry opposition to those proposals is starting to change a little bit. It's still be a very difficult road to hoe in Michigan, but I think it's something worth keeping an eye on. I'll just say about our local legislators. There is a terrific bill that Jeff Irwin has introduced in the Senate and Youssef Rabi in the House, which gets at the PFAS issue and would ban it in most food in food packaging. And these sorts of policies have been adopted in other states. Debbie Dingell has co-sponsored a bill that would do a similar thing at the federal level. The state proposal, I think isn't going to get a hearing, but just know that our folks are doing the good work, trying their hardest in a tough political environment.
Yeah, and we can support them and support candidates who are activists on the environment. I'm going to take a few questions that were in chat, and then I'm going to go to questions also that were that came in earlier, most of which are about recycling. So I've clumped those together. One of our colleagues in chat asks if you're familiar with TerraCycle.com and what do you think of their work?
TerraCycle takes all sorts of hard to recycle items and makes them into stuff, or finds uses for stuff and donates some of the end products sometimes. It's a nice service. It's no systemic solution. A lot of hard to recycle items. I guess what I would recommend for hard to recycle items, which is what TerraCycle is trying to get at, a lot of them can be reused at different. Some thrift shops will take them. Other reuse places will take them. A lot of materials can be dropped off at Recycle and Arbor's drop-off station at Platt and Ellsworth Road. Also the one on Jackson Road near Dexter, the recovery yard, also takes a lot of stuff. The hard to recycle items are best taken to the Platt and Ellsworth site, and TerraCycle. I don't want to say anything. I don't want to say anything negative about TerraCycle, but it's again it fills in a small gap in the system.
Yeah, doing good stuff, but not really necessary for us here because we have such good services already here. Sounds like.
You could put it that way.
Okay. Another question from chat. What are the most important things for WRRMA to be working on? WRRMA is Washtenaw Regional Resource Management Authority.
Oh, well, okay. This is a really interesting topic. After the Ann Arbor MRF was closed down, one good idea was that the community should band together. The communities in the eastern, in the urbanized part of the county, should band together and try to finance solid waste infrastructure, zero waste infrastructure, if you will, themselves. The old MRF was built by the city in that campaign that I mentioned, working on with Susan Greenberg in the league decades ago. The old MRF was owned by Ann Arbor and was operated by a private company. But building a new one is not cheap. And the thought was that the communities could come together and capitalize a new facility. Well, that, for a lot of reasons, that pathway didn't materialize. Instead, Recycling Arbor came up with its own. We came up with our own initiative and our own capital to rebuild it and work with the city on that. But the authority that was mentioned still exists, and there are other very useful things that it can do. The two things that they have focused their plans and attention on are building a stronger drop-off network, recycling drop-off network throughout the region, and on doing education throughout the eastern part of the county in Ann Arbor. So you've got a number of different communities with different kinds of resources, different programs in hand right now, but they all need these kind of drop-off services of different sorts. And there's a plan that's been developed that would replace the Platt and Ellsworth site, which is on the old Ann Arbor landfill, and it's been sinking into the landfill for 20 years. I don't know if anyone's been out there recently. If you go after the rain, it's a it's a difficult place to get around in, and really has been in need of a replacement for years. The other parts of the county could use small unstaffed drop-off stations too. You know, people who don't have access. Some folks in the township, some of the townships don't have curbside recycling programs. They could use drop-off stations. One idea is to make the recovery yard site on Jackson Road a second place for hard to recycle materials. And there's some other ideas around that. This would take us a significant investment building a new network of sites, but a lot smaller than building a new MRF, which, as I mentioned, was $7 million for a pretty small facility like Ann Arbor's. Talking about a much smaller investment there. There's also a really big need for education, education funds. And the authorities already started a small project. They got some grant funding from the state to do some education in Ypsilanti, Ypsi Township, some of the other communities in the authority, not in Ann Arbor. I think those are enough for now. those would be two great things. You know, I mentioned in my slide about the region. I mentioned, you know, one of my priorities was investing in our zero waste infrastructure, and that's exactly what that was created to do.
What the WRRMA was created to do.
Yeah, I mean, people refer to it as WRMA,
thank you. WRMA, that's
WRMA was, like I said, WRMA was originally created to build a new MRF. It didn't end up doing that, but it still has the capability through pooling the resources of the member communities. It has, you know, at least in concept, the ability to fund new facilities and invest in that infrastructure. One of the other things I mentioned that could be a WRMA activity as well is construction and demolition materials, which I would put up there on the priority list. Right now, the only place in Washtenaw County, really in all of Southeast Michigan, that building materials get processed and some materials recovered is at that Jackson Road site that Recyclable Arbor runs, and the recovery there is very rudimentary. In more established, in other states that have good policy, good policy promoting recovery, you see MRFs, sorting facilities for building materials. Like we have a MRF for household and office items, business items. So that could be a longer term project as well.
Okay, I wanted to ask you, when you mentioned building materials and also you managed to get the incineration of medical waste eliminated in Washtenaw County. I want to get a sense of the biggest sources of waste, both industrial and then the sectors that are the biggest sources of waste, industrial and also consumer. Can you just give us a little, like a picture of that? Medical waste and construction waste.
I don't have those on the tip of my tongue. The household and business waste is regulated separately from medical waste, which is regulated separately from industrial waste, and that's regulated separately from hazardous wastes and radioactive wastes and other, you know, very dangerous materials. I don't know the breakdown off the top of my head. I will say this, for the materials that are part of what we call municipal solid waste or ordinary solid waste, in Michigan, less than 20% of materials get recycled or composted. At this point, the only remaining incinerator of municipal waste is in Kent County. we've campaigned to shut down municipal waste incinerators too.
Mhm.
Very proud of work we did in Detroit to close down what was probably the largest incinerator in the country, but also one in Inkster that ran for a number of years and served the Wayne County communities and some other incinerators around the state. There was one in Jackson that we worked to close. But so at this point, more than 80% of Michigan's waste is getting landfilled. A little bit in Kent counties, it's getting incinerated, and that's not too good. The state's goal is 30%. That's about where Ann Arbor is right now, which could be better too. It's a little hard to compare household waste to these other kinds of waste. I mean, I will say as a stuff issue, the amount of stuff from industry that gets disposed of and reused by industry far exceeds the amount of stuff that we throw out from our houses and businesses. Thing is, since that's controlled by manufacturers and producers of different sorts, they have a financial incentive to manage it as much as they can. And so the recycling recovery levels are far higher for sort of in-house waste that, say, Ford Motor Company might produce in making cars. All of the major manufacturers, have put a lot of focus on their waste stream and the design of their systems so that they save money.
Great. So clothing manufacturers, for instance, because I know that's a large source of waste, right? Cheap clothing worldwide. Is that
well, once it's in the market, once it's in the marketplace, that's another thing. Once it's in the marketplace and it's and it's used by consumers, then it's then it's part of household. It's part of that household waste number. I was talking about the production of clothes at a factory or cars and assembly.
Right, and I'm asking if the producers of clothes are similarly incentivized to reduce the waste on their end as other manufacturers. They are too. Good. Well, that's something. So we have been, our last month's programs were focused on environmental racism. And you talked about the disparate impact of all of this on poor and Black and brown communities. And one of our people asked what the pay scale is for workers in recycling. Are these good jobs, or are they entry-level kind of minimum wage jobs?
It depends. The collection of recyclables, folks driving the trucks for waste management, Republic Services, the big trash companies that provide recycling services, they pay truck driver wages, and most of their employees are not unionized. There are some exceptions. There are local units of government that have their own collection crews. They tend to pay union wages, and they're 20-25% higher. Recycle in Arbor is a union shop, UAW represented and organized. They pay wages comparable to what public units pay, what the city of Ann Arbor pays. Their benefits, I can't say their benefits are quite as good, but they pay a living wage, and it's pretty competitive. On the material sorting side of it, that's a really important issue. And again, most facilities around the country are run by again the landfill companies that dominate the industry. And most private sector MRFs pay most of their sorters minimum wage or not much more. There again are a few publicly owned and operated facilities that pay better. The only The only unionized recycling sorting facilities that I know of are one run by the mission-based recycler in Colorado, the one run by the mission-based recycler in the Twin Cities, and Recycling Arbor at their new facility. And they're paying, their workers again are union. They're still hiring people actually for the new facility, and they're paying living wage for those jobs.
Okay.
And then when you go further down the line to the to the paper mills and plastics facilities, factories, and the glass manufacturers, places where the materials go, that's a whole nother matter.
Right. Okay. So the answer is, as you said, it depends on the ownership of the or organization that's paying the people.
It should be a requirement. I mean, I think if a city believes in living wage and worker empowerment, taking good care of their employees and people who do the hard work in their community, they're going to require, even if they're contracting out services, they're going to require that they're good labor practices at the facilities they operate, and they have that power. They have that power. It's rarely exercised.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm watching the clock, and I want to be sure to get to a lot of the questions about recycling that have come in, and I'll remind everybody about Recyclable Ann Arbor's great drop-down menu, or search feature. But before I do, a question came in over before we started about oceans, and it's a question that's both it's kind of naive, but it's also really interesting. Who's in charge of dealing with ocean pollution, which of course is heartbreaking for all of us. So, like, how do you get a hold of a question like that?
That's a great question. I don't have a good answer.
Yeah.
It's the old saw about environmental problems being the horror of the commons, and one that's not really regulated or managed in any way, shape, or form. That there are international treaties that have created some kind of understandings about trade on the oceans, and a number of other practices. But when it comes to environmental protection, dealing with the plastic problem, there's truly no responsible party. There is serious talk about a global plastics treaty getting negotiated, and I believe that might get started in 2022. Obviously, that would be one of the issues here.
Yeah.
That's a terrific question, and
great question.
Problem we have.
Heartbreaking question. Great question. Okay, so I want to ask you a few questions about recycling. Everybody's super worried about plastic, and what we as individuals can do. And I just want to remind everybody, recycleannarbor.org, fantastic website, great question bar, like, what do I do with this? Fill it in. And if you can't find what you want to ask about, there's a chunk, a section for you to, write and ask. So go to recycleannarbor.org. For a lot of the questions you had, I'm not asking all of them, just a few of them that are a little bit more general. Well, that I couldn't find on the recycleannarbor.org website. So first of all, what is the number inside the recycle system on plastic containers What does that mean? And is it meaningful for us in terms of recycling stuff? That is so confusing.
It should be banned,
It
frankly.
should be banned.
And,
Okay.
and we're talking within this Amber, the mission-based recycler organization. We've started talking with some influential players in the industry about just that possibility. It was established years ago to identify the resin that the plastic resin that the package is made from. Excuse me. Most plastic packaging is made from one of 6 resins. The water bottles, other juice bottles, are clear bottles, and color bottles too, are often are usually number 1 plastic, which is incidentally the same kind of resin that that polyester jackets are made out of, and a lot of fleeces are made out of, and that's why they're so easy to recycle into that kind of clothing. The milk jugs, cloudy plastic is generally number 2 high density polyethylene plastic, and 3, 4, 5, and 6 are other resins that are generally less common as packaging, but not uncommon, and more difficult to recycle. There's also, you'll also see they're called chasing arrows, the arrow symbols. You'll also see the chasing arrows around the number 7 sometimes, and that's a mixed resin package. The only plastic that is really almost always recyclable is number 1.
Okay.
HDP number 2 is usually recyclable, especially when it's a big jug like that. And number 5, plastics, polypropylene, have pretty good markets, and they're when they're in the form of yogurt containers and other tubs, they're pretty easily sorted from at recycling sorting facilities. But the others, they're not being accepted by Recycle Ann Arbor now. They should not be accepted in hardly any recycling program around the country. And even with 1, 2, and 5, there are issues sometimes. And like the toothpaste tube, which has the number 5 label number on it, and there are products you'll find. You'll often see takeout containers that are made from number 6 or number 1 plastic. Okay. And those are referred to as thermoform plastics, and they're generally not recyclable at all if they're the trays, even though they've got the number, they've got the recycling arrows on it. That's my other prop here. And this stuff, Black, you got any of these trays? You know, these takeout trays? Yeah. That one's a number 1 plastic. They also come in number 6 and other resins. Anything that's any black plastic is just unrecyclable at a typical sorting facility.
It's just so upsetting.
Yeah, it is. And I gotta say another thing about it, just because it is so upsetting. It's really important to know that plastics are a tiny portion of all the materials that are in the waste stream. It's about nationwide, it's about 9%. In Ann Arbor, in Washtenaw County generally, it's more like 7%, because a lot of them are taken up by the bottle bill. So it's a relatively small portion of the waste stream, but it's a huge portion of the problem. And you know, when these recycling programs all got started, there were very few plastic packages out there.
Glass.
Yeah,
not
that stuff was put in glass or tin or aluminum,
Uh-huh.
all of which have really, have really good markets when the materials are clean. The glass that is captured by the bottle bill is recycled at a very high level, and it's turned into glass over and over and over, glass bottles over and over and over again. It's hard to turn a plastic bottle into a plastic bottle again. Not impossible, but not easy, and not that common, although that's what Recycling Arbor's planning to have done with theirs. So
So
that's what I
my
got to say, that the chasing arrows are very misleading.
stupid. Yeah. So no, yeah, okay. Incredibly confusing. So when you say it's a small part of the total waste stream, but a huge part of the problem, clarify that. Like it's a plastics are a small part of the waste stream, but a huge part of the problem.
Um, the
I think
production of plastics from generally from petrochemicals
got it.
uses is incredibly energy intensive, and is
Oh,
one of, and by industry is one of the leading contributors to climate change.
got it.
The production of chemicals is extremely of plastic is extremely toxic, like I talked about Cancer Alley and
Yeah.
in Louisiana, and there are all sorts of impacts there. On the waste side of it, all the things that gum up the works in these in these recycling programs, and now in composting programs too. Well, not all of it, but most of it, most of it's from plastic.
No.
We're now having an issue in municipal composting programs where some of the plant-based plastics have been marketed as compostable, when again, same thing, they're not really.
Oh,
They're theoretically compostable. They're compostable in certain kinds of composting facilities, large indoor ones generally, that get materials to a high temperature. Ann Arbor's doesn't do that, and most in Michigan don't do that either. So again, the plastics create a problem there and a lot of confusion. If you really want to just going on with the plant-based compostables, if you're interested in whether or not it's really compostable or not, you should look for you should look on the package for the BPI label. That's a certification label that that grades, certifies plastics for being really compostable or not.
okay. Well, so it sounds like, and this is my next to last question, because I want to respect your time and ours. But so it sounds like we should we try to recycle plastics, or should we not try to recycle plastics? It sounds like it's causing the recycling center more trouble than it's worth.
Try to recycle 1, 2, and 5 plastics.
Try to recycle 1, 2, and 5. What if they have labels glued to them that you can't get off? Still put that in the compost bin?
Oh, you're talking about composting now, or recycling?
I'm sorry, not I meant recycle. I meant recycle. Sorry.
That's okay. But but remember, it's bottles and tubs, larger items. The smaller ones, like the toothpaste tube, really difficult to sort. So there's there are quite a few plastic containers like that, and more coming out onto the market every day. Number 3 plastics are polyvinyl chloride, very toxic to produce and to dispose of. Number 4 plastics are plastic bags. Again, if they're separate, those can be recycled. You know, the grocery stores that have collection baskets for plastic bags, those probably do get recycled. Recycling Arbor takes them too. I mean, if you want to recycle plastic bags, that's the way to do it. Polystyrene, number 6 plastic, styrofoam foam, that also gets recycled. They take it at the drop-off station. It gets turned into, I wouldn't really recommend it. Try to avoid that stuff as much as you can.
Right, right. But, and you know what, to help us avoid it, we go to Mind the Store for organized consumer pressure to stop the production of these toxic products.
Yeah, that's not going to help you when you're buying stuff online or going to get your groceries or other stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I think at that level, the basic message that recyclers and we've been giving out for years to, do what you can to buy things that are reusable and reduce as much as possible. The original message, the original message from decades ago still makes sense to reduce and first reduce, then reuse, then recycle and compost.
All right. I got to let you go. I wanted to ask you to paint a picture of the circular economy for us. Can you do that in like a minute? Paint a picture of life in a circular economy. What would our day-to-day lives be like?
Oh, can you imagine? Can you imagine that you would buy products in containers that you would return to grocery stores or manufacturers, and they would have systems set up where they could actually take them back and get them reused? There are experiments out there right now to try to do that at scale. The city is experimenting with a takeout system for reusable containers through their A20 plan, and there are all sorts of reusable pilot projects getting developed around the world. I think we would have the stuff we would produce would have would be it would be compostable. It would be recoverable if we can't use it some other way, but we wouldn't have all this garbage in our lives, all the stuff that the world brings us. But it's only going to happen because there's been changes in the way our policy and our politics get carried on, and that people have come together to change the way manufacturers, the companies that make the stuff have to distribute it to everyone else. That'd be the kind of world that would look circular, and we wouldn't have to worry about whether that piece of plastic actually goes in the recycling bin or the composting bin or not anywhere at all. It would all be something that was designed for people living regular lives to work with day to day in their homes and workplaces.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you that is a beautiful vision. I want to tell everybody, don't forget, it's the holiday season. And if you want to give a gift to ecocenter.org. Gift your friends and family with memberships in ecocenter.org. Mike, thank you so much for being here. We really, really, really appreciate your time, your expertise, and the incredible work you do for us. Thank you.
Teresa, everyone, thank you so much. I really enjoyed spending the time with you.
Super informative. And thanks everybody else for joining us for Brews and Views tonight. The program committee's focus on climate change continues through the last program of the year on Friday, December 19th, the Lunch and Learn, hosted by Shelley Shanfield. We'll talk with leaders of the Huron River Watershed Council about protecting our very own watershed, what we can and must do close to home to keep our waters clean and healthy. Again, thank you to 3 members of the League's environmental advocacy group, Sandy Serini Elser, Vicki Paulison, and Kathy Weinman, who have brought terrific expertise and connections to our environmental programming. Thank you so much. In 2022, we're focusing on women and power, or women changing the conversation. Keep an eye on our website for more details. That's lwvwashtenaw.org. or on Facebook, facebook.com LWV and you can always check on our calendar listing, lwvwashtenaw.org. All right, don't forget, do not sign Protect My Vote. Do not sign Protect My Vote. Check out there's a link again to the LWV's statement in the chat. Just as important, tell our senators to support the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. That is an order from the League of Women Voters of the United States. That link also is in the chat. Thanks for being here tonight. Take good care and have a safe and happy holiday.